Welcome to UONGOZI Show, where our forums of discussions keep you well informed. I'm joined by Professor Joao Leopoldo da Costa, who's the Executive Committee Chairperson of the Electoral Commission Forum on SADC countries, and also joined by Dr. Kiggundu Badru Malimbo, the Chairman of the Uganda Electoral Commission, who are participating in a conference on managing elections in Africa, which brought together representatives of election management bodies from several African nations to discuss and share experiences on the challenges of managing the election process in Africa. Welcome, gentlemen. Karibu.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Since the introduction of multi-party systems in Africa in the early 1990s, most countries have now held more than 3 consecutive elections, and most of them have been successful. What is your general opinion about the credibility and general legitimacy of these elections? I'll start with Professor here.
Thank you. Democracy is a process, and being as such, it takes time for consolidation. As far as concerned to the matter of credibility, it depends also on the perception that is built during the process of the elections. Depends on the comments that people do about the process, the way the electoral commissions perform, and so on.
What are your views, Dr. Kiggundu?
Well, I don't deviate very much from my colleague, but my opinion is we have mixed credibility and legitimacy due to a number of inherent factors to every country. And perception is one, because we perceive, or the various stakeholders in any of these countries perceive an event differently, particularly losers of political election. Those usually are the ones who make a lot of noise. Observers of elections add value or lessen value to the credibility of the process. But the commissions do a lot. I call it a thankless industry.
How many elections have you been in as chairman?
General elections, there have been 2 general elections, each of which we've had over 19,000 elective offices in the general election. But in my country, the total elective density is over 1 million offices. If I take account of all governments, because we run elections all the way from village administration, parish administration, sub-county administration, district administration, parliament, and presidency. And I don't know of any African country that has the same density in an election cycle.
So it is triple hard for you and for your officers as
It
well?
is quite challenging, it's interesting. We can't throw the hats, but we have to carry out the mission.
Professor Leopoldo, how about you? How many years have you stood as the Electoral Commission Executive Committee Chairperson?
For about 5 years. I started in June 2007. So next June I will complete 5 years.
You will finish your 5-year term. And in your own country, have you been involved in the elections?
Yes, we did have municipal election, provincial elections, presidential and parliamentary elections. Last December, we did have also municipal elections in 3 municipalities in the north and center of Mozambique.
So Mozambique generally, how have the elections been? Have they been peaceful, free and fair without mixed credibility?
You know, usually when we have elections, those who don't win always complain. I might be honest that before I joined the Electoral Commission, even myself, based on what I saw in the newspaper, what I was watching on television, I was asking myself why they don't avoid this or that. But when I started working inside the Electoral Commission, I saw that the history was completely different.
Sure.
It is very frequent that the news who come in the newspaper do not correspond to the reality. I'm not saying that we are not committing some mistakes, that's true, but not always which comes in the media corresponds to the truth.
So, if I should redirect this question that seems to be jumping the gun, what is the role of media in elections? It seems to be the enemy here.
Is a partner. It has to be a partner. As a professional, it's important to be a real professional. Before announcing something, it's important to go to the roots of the story to get more information, and after that to publish. And not always happens.
Dr. Kiggundu, how is it in Uganda? How has media helped, fuel the elections, or has it brought only just, bad news?
No, media is a key stakeholder, and we recognize it very well as the Electoral Commission. We invite them to special training sessions about reporting specifically on elections. We invite them to our commission, very periodic for press conferences where we share any new information that we want the population to know. We hold them dear as mouthpiece, as spokespersons or spokes institutions, which has got a wider reach to the population. When you talk about, say, radio communication, in Uganda we have more than 140 radio stations. They are spread in literally all the districts. But of course, one cannot say that they are 100% accurate in what they report wholesomely, because these are institutions which are some of which are owned by politicians. And therefore, some of them are bound to have a little bit of partiality because of who pays the bill at the end of the month. However, we try to, as I said, call them in and impress upon them that the only thing you can report as far as elections are concerned, particularly a result, is what has come from the Commission.
Thank you. Professor Leopold, now the actual administration of elections is a key challenge by itself. And here, the roles of election management bodies are vital during the electoral cycle. What is your general assessment on how elections have been organized and managed in the SADC region?
I think that progress has been made. However, I have the feeling that we still have some challenges. Some improvement can be made. We need to improve the dialogue with the key stakeholders in different areas, and in some way to improve the administration process itself. As more transparent, the better for the credibility of the process.
Dr. Kiggundu, is this the same recommendation that you've got?
Well, first of all, we're strictly obliged to the electoral law. We're strictly obliged to the constitutional provisions of conducting the elections. We have special provisions in our constitution which prescribes what and when and who has the authority to do the following. As an example, Article 61 of the Constitution, Clause 2, prescribes that the Electoral Commission shall conduct presidential, general parliamentary, and local government elections in the first 30 days of the last 90 days of government. That is the pinnacle of our electoral programs.
Right.
And we have followed that to the letter. In the same article, there's a provision constitutionally. The Electoral Commission shall set the dates of the polling or the entire electoral agenda. Mm-hmm. The Electoral Commission has that constitutional liberty and freedom without referring to anyone else for oversight. But of course it does not say you don't consult. You can consult because we are part and parcel of our government. Yes, we're an independent organization, but at the same time we run a program which is government program, a program which is funded by government. So we also train our own staff, we recruit our own staff, and we fire our own staff without recourse to anybody. If anybody wants to express aggrievement, he or she can go to the processes which are set out in the country. I'm not saying there's a perfect system, but generally that's what I would want.
That's usually what happens. And Uganda has been fiery in the past few elections. It has been extremely fiery. We've had opposition coming up, complaining. We've had the ruling party coming up and saying this. How do you manage that as the chairman?
Well, first of all, it is an assignment which has to be done by someone.
Definitely.
And this time around happens to be my turn. I can't run away from responsibility. It does not matter how much cries somebody does, that makes me sway from the legal position. And if anything, I'll tell them, go back and read the law. See what the law says, then contest my decision. If you understand the law differently, let's get together and we dissect. And I tell them, I'm a professor of engineering. That doesn't mean that I don't understand legal prescription.
Right.
So we get around it. If they are dissatisfied, their course of action is to go to courts of law. The freedom is there. And I even give it to them. I say, go to the courts of law and we shall meet in courts. We are very privileged, by the way, in that anybody who is aggrieved, even at presidential level, there's a prescription in the Constitution how somebody can get his aggrievement handled.
Yes.
And even the time is given as to when such aggrievement can be settled. Within 30 days, it must be finished, so that there's enough time to prepare for the swearing in of the president. And that provision is very unique. I've read a number of constitutions of African countries, and I've not seen where a presidential petition can be handled in that relatively short time.
Okay. Professor Leopoldo da Costa, how about you? Do you think election management bodies in the region have the institutional capacity to hold free and fair elections, as we imagine?
Certainly, yes. What is important is to follow the law. Sometimes some partners feel with the right of interfering in the process, which damaged the authority of the Electoral Commission. So in Mozambique, I'm chairperson of the Electoral Commission in Mozambique, we follow strictly the law, and we do not accept interference either from the political parties, from donors, whatever.
So in instances where people have said that the elections have been rigged, especially like we've all recognized that opposition will always have that cry. Always. I've never heard of an opposition that has, considered right and said, oh yes, we've lost. They always say, no, there's been rigging. How do you handle that? Because you're trying to be a free and fair election management body. How do you handle situations like this? Because they happen all the time.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think the far cry, expressed before or after, I think is trying to get the sympathy of the supporters in case he or she does not win. We can't run away from it. I guess it is partly human. Dissatisfaction is human. And but what we're trying to do, like in Uganda, is to come up with a national consultative forum where we engage political party leaders in advance so that we sort of put a cooling effect to possible problems that may occur after. Because if we perceive that this is and so is happening, we ask them to bring it on the table and we dissect it. We look at it. Eventually, sometimes it's just perception other than real. And once they see that you actually do have the heart to resolve what will be a problem, they come down. It has worked well for us over the last 2 general elections. It was not in the form of a National Consultative Forum yet, but it was some kind of a liaison, peace liaison committee, which had been set up by the Commission. It helped very well. But that's not to say that at the end of the process, somebody will not complain that I'm cheated. For instance, in 2006, we had 73 electoral petitions after the general election, out of which 50 of them were won by the Commission. Yes. And this time around, after the 2011 general election, we had about 140 petitions. Why? First of all, the population is bigger. More people are more exposed to education. Right. And therefore, larger competition and more districts were created. So a lot more elective positions were open. And therefore, the number of petitions went up. But if you look at it as a proportion of the elective density, it's still about 0.3%. I think when we get more educated and more understanding of the democratic process, we shall get better and eventually learn to accept the outcome of an election. In whatever country looks at an election as a football match. Because whatever position you want to contest, make sure you are in to win or to lose.
Well, the more the stakeholders have confidence in the election process and its outcome, the more do elections contribute positively to democracy and political stability. And here I'm looking at most of the African countries. Looking back at the last election that was held, do you think stakeholders in Uganda have confidence in the election process and its outcome?
Let's take a country as big as, say, the US. Right. What percentage votes? About 40%. Out of the 40%, they are all satisfied or there are some agreement. So likewise, I would generally say, yes, the perception, the confidence level is good, but not perfect. And there are areas of improvement, and we shall continue to improve.
What are the areas that challenge you most that you would like to improve?
Well, one of the areas is the constant knocking at the head that Kiggundu, because he was appointed by the current president, forgetting that we were peer-reviewed by Parliament. Therefore, he sits in that chair and leans across. And you tell them, first of all, you must understand the Constitution. Opposition is government in waiting. And when that opposition comes into seat, we can use the example of Kenya. Yes. When the group that took over... The
Rainbow Coalition.
Yes. Yes. They were saying so much before the election against Moi's government.
That was Kanu.
But as soon as they entered Parliament, God heavens, it was like a freebie environment. Increase this, give me a car. Hey. This perception needs a continual dialogue. So we are trying to pull the political parties, invite them to dialogue with us. And we have just recently finished a workshop where we dialogued with them under the new National Consultative Forum. And we invited resource persons from outside the country. The chairperson of South African Electoral Commission was one of the key resource persons invited. We also had invited the chairperson of Ghana Electoral Commission to come and infuse or bring in new approaches as to how our sister commissions handle issues of interrelationships with political parties. Other areas of challenge is usually late enactment of amendable areas in laws.
Right.
When I came in, before the first general election that I conducted, in 2006, the amendments of the electoral laws came out at the end of November. And 2 weeks into December, we had to start nominations of presidential candidates. God, you have to be a messiah to have read
everything and
everything,
and
put it here, and then
and implemented it.
and then make extracts which you will
Yes.
disseminate
Yes.
in voter education. So, but the next time around we said, government, you must pass the laws 1 year to the election. And this time around, we made it a song. Eventually they saw it and started talking positively in our favor. This time they passed the laws 9 months to the election, which, according to me as a professor of engineering, mathematics, I said, I give you 75% as government. Publicly, even before Parliament, I said, I give government 75%. And I said, but next time we want 100%.
Right.
So the other one is late release of resources for elections, and sometimes relatively inadequate.
Right.
So that remains a challenge.
Professor Leopoldo, if the electoral management body is suspected of a lack of impartiality, definitely the credibility of the electoral process is diminished. And of course, this often leads into violence when results are announced. In your view, what has been the performance of these important institutions in the SADC region?
As I mentioned before, credibility depends on the performance of the electoral management bodies and also of the role of the key stakeholders. But civil education is very important. You know that the rate of illiteracy in our countries is very high. Poverty is very high. People are not enough informed about the process, about attitudes and so on. And even in terms of democratic culture is a new process in our countries. So I think that is a matter of time, and we need also to invest a lot in civil education, voting education.
Without stereotyping, can I use an example of Kenya? What went wrong? Without stereotyping, can I use the example of Zimbabwe? What went wrong? In terms of this, how can we actually talk about credibility in such instances?
We cannot just assess the situation based on the election itself. It depends on the general situation of the country. Of course, we mentioned before that some parties, even knowing the truth, they don't act accordingly to that. There is always a risk of having one or two parties making noise around the results.
The conduct of democratic and peaceful elections requires a tolerant political culture amongst stakeholders. What is your assessment of the situation in the SADC region? Do you think there's respect for the rules of the game right now?
You know, the culture of tolerance, it also has to do with democratic culture and the information that people have. If you remember, in the year 2000, when the United States, George Bush and Al Gore went for the elections, the popular perception was that Al Gore won the elections. And the process ended up at the court. But at the end, the statement from the court announced George Bush as the winner.
As the winner, true.
And they accept the result as it was. In our countries, not always this happens for two reasons. Firstly, because the losers are not prepared to accept that they lost. And secondly, because sometimes some stakeholders do not help the losers to accept the results. You know, when someone starts reporting things that are not completely true about the process, they are influencing in some way the way of thinking of the voters, of the public. I'll tell you one story. What happens in Mozambique in the year 2008, 2007, when we were doing the voting registration. I used to visit the districts and have meetings with the political parties at district level, at provincial level, political parties and civil society. And when I was in Manica province, which is neighbor of Zimbabwe, the political parties told me that some visitors went there to alert them that they should be aware that probably some Zimbabweans are being registered to vote in favor of Frelimo. And I asked them, I laugh, because we did have very good results, near to 95%. And Manica was the province where the level, the percentage was lower compared to the other provinces. And I told them, unfortunately, your informant doesn't know statistics. Because if the 95% that we reached at the national level would be to the Zimbabwean people who came inside to register, Manica province should be the one who should have higher rate, more than 100%.
Yes.
But you have the lowest. If I didn't pay that visit, maybe some people could believe that this happened, and this could be a source of conflict during the election process.
Dr. Kiggundu, has voter and civic education been a key component of electoral process in Uganda?
By constitution, the Electoral Commission is mandated to extend civic education, particularly voter education, continually across the year. However, due to inadequate funding, in fact, most times when we do a budget for voter education across the year, it is one of the least, one of the first one to be cut or to be chopped. So inadequate funding does affect our voter education. Here is another challenge, and I usually pose it as a question. Is it the quantity of voter education that will yield an equivalent amount of turnout of voters? Those two don't match. I did an experiment after our referendum in 2005, because people were complaining, we've not been sensitized enough. And we said, okay. I sat down with my board and we engaged a particular firm, which after spending a whole month going around the country, produced a report which showed that 73% of the population were aware, as far as the electoral program of awareness creation.
The sensitization.
But 47% was the actual result of the referendum. Now, 47%, 73% said, but the deficit, where did it go? It's one thing to educate somebody, or to aware somebody, but it's another to pull them out of their Amazongo beds, the comfort of their bedrooms.
That's very true. Back to you, Professor. Now, there's been a formation of governments of national unity, which is now almost seen as fashionable, GNUs. And it's seen as a solution whenever there are controversial elections in which lead to sporadic incidents of violence and hostilities. You know, we've got Zimbabwe, Kenya, Zanzibar, and let's go as far as the UK. Okay. In your view, does this solution work, and does it contribute to a better governance of these countries?
To be honest with you, I think that this is a matter that don't concern the electoral bodies. For us, we must manage the process, and we shouldn't be involved in this kind of discussions. We cannot influence anything about that.
So it's not up to the electoral commissions when it comes to the GNUs?
My opinion.
Your opinion, Dr. Kiggundu?
Yeah, the general opinion, I do agree with him. However, I think it is an artificial creation in the domain of governance. You can see the challenge, like in our sister country, Kenya, or even accepting on an election date. The two parties have to be, can you agree on this?
Everything has to be in tandem.
Even a decision to when can you dissolve a government different. That's not the way to go. First of all, elections are the most expensive civic undertaking of any country. And to think of urging two combating groups to accept to another election, the exchequer may not afford it. So it is something of convenience, but it's not a working model.
Professor Leopoldo, it is now considered important to include the component of independent observers in the electoral process. These observers provide a certain confidence in the process and can offer a healthy incentive for proper candidates, conduct by the candidates and political parties. In your view, how has this worked out in different countries? Doesn't have to be in Mozambique. Talking about the independent observers in the electoral process.
Independent observers. I think this is important to ensure transparency, credibility of the process. I think it's always important to have these observers. However, it's important also that the observers might be fully informed about the process and might report what really they observe. Sometimes there is a trend, instead of assessing the process based on they observe or based eventually on the reports, official reports and so on, there is a trend of trying to introduce in the analysis other information not enough that result without a deeper research about it. You see what I mean? So if I'm an observer, I have to report what I've observed. Is how I think they should do, and sometimes
they don't do that.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
I have mixed opinion. One side says they are helpful. Another side says they can be harmful. There's one example I gave of one international observer who came during the referendum in Uganda. And I came at a time of declaring a result after I had received 98% of the turnout. And I said, 47%, any comments? And one international observer put up her hand. It was a female, unfortunately, the mother of nations. The chairman, you are lying. The result was 18%. Oh, I felt like jumping in her neck. And I warned her, I said, look, what you have done is adversarial to my country, because you have given a headline to one of the newspapers the next morning. That headline certainly came out the following morning, which read, international observers say the election outcome 18%, the Electoral Commission says 47%, who do you trust? That was the front page headline. So they can be adversarial, and that can be the beginning of creation of this syndrome of suspicion.
Right.
The Electoral Commission is not telling the truth. So they can have that adversarial role. But we shall work with them until we can understand one another. After all, they come and spend their own money.
Right.
But they should be respectful of what they utter. What they utter should be reflective of the quality as they have seen it. Because what they say really counts in the media. Media catches it. The media which looks for headlines.
Right.
So that's why I have said mixed opinion. And
so it can be helpful or it can be harmful.
They can be adversarial.
That's true.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, Professor Leopoldo and Dr. Kiggundu, now to wind up this interview, what else would you like to offer as advice in the management of elections in Africa?
Well, if I can take a shot.
Yes.
I think, as I said earlier, we are in our kindergarten stages of democratic culturing. So I think we need to evolve an electoral process of our own, homegrown.
Right.
There are certain elements which can cut across. Let us look for those synergies to strengthen and come as close as possible to one another. But there's some specificities which can be very difficult to rule out and say, we are doing something wrong. I can't do that to my fellow electoral commissions because I'm not a member. So at the global level we are members,
Right.
but I'm not a member to his or her
Country.
country. So mutual respect is very, very important. The third one is elections are too expensive. I think we need to learn to share resources. There are certain resources that we can share if our election agendas are not on the same days or in the same months. As an example, ballot boxes. What help does it make for me to keep them 6 months in stores when my next door neighbor has got a general election?
In a month's time.
Exactly.
True.
So if we can learn and begin to trust one another, because sometimes there are roadblocks. Procurement regulations sometimes may not favor. And we'll continue saying our countries cannot afford elections. But election program is our own national government programs.
Yes.
And therefore, our governments should develop the capacity to fund our election programs so we stay away from this kneeling before those who can influence negatively the outcome of our election. We should be mindful of who we engage, who we work with, because the same observer can observe an election here in TZ, Tanzania, and make a different report, but goes to, say, Uganda or Nigeria and makes a flowery report.
Yes.
And the AU must be firm about elections in Africa. We must be guided more by the AU. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Leopoldo da Costa. How about you? How should we manage elections in Africa, lastly?
I think that we need to develop regional standards that, while taking into account international principles, could also consider social, economic, and the culture and political realities of each country. Of course, it has to be adjusted to the specific conditions of each country. On the other hand, I think that we should work hard in civic and voting education. Is important to avoid conflicts, to promote dialogue, and to strengthen the relationship with the key stakeholders. Being in our mind that each of stakeholders and EMBs has a specific role. We might promote dialogue, we might learn from each other, but the Electoral Commission has his own specific role, and interference doesn't help to the Electoral Commission. And I think that by promoting permanent dialogue, we can improve our role, either in bloc or each of the stakeholder organization.
Thank you very, very much, gentlemen. Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure talking about election management in Africa, and also has been a learning experience. Thank you very much.
And we thank our audience, wherever they are.
Thank you. They are watching this. You have been watching UONGOZI Show. I'm Baby Kabaya. I've been joined by Professor Joao Leopoldo da Costa, the Executive Committee Chairperson of the Electoral Commission Forum on SADC countries, and Dr. Kiggundu Badru Malimbo, the Chairman of the Uganda Electoral Commission. Thank you. Good evening.